Hello, wonderful people. We're almost there. It's almost the end of the semester. You're going to make it, I promise. All right? We're almost done. Welcome to the Fall 2016 Plains Writers Series, Part 2, an event held 4 times a year at Wayne State College. The Plains Writers Series features Great Plains area authors, which is sort of, we're fibbing on that today, and artists have been an integral part of Wayne State's history since 1977. We have 3 people today. We're just doing from 2 to about 3:30 or so. We got Liz Kay, Teri Grimm, and Tom Paine. A little bit of poetry, a little bit of fiction, it's a little bit of everything. So I hope you guys are up for this tonight. Also, we have a fiction slam at the Max Bar and Grill. If you haven't been to one, it's pretty awesome. You need to check them out. It starts at 7 o'clock. If you want to participate in the slam, you got to bring 2 short stories and $5, and you got to show up at the prelims at 5 o'clock. They'll have a little preliminary round to see if you can get in, because we do the Lucky 13 the first round, and then we go down to 4. Huge cash prizes, millions of dollars. I believe the last estimate was millions of dollars, and a couple coupons to Utter Delights. So the good stuff. Yeah. We're going to start off with Teri Grimm. I'm going to read a bit about Teri here. Teri Grimm is the 4th generation, is it Floridian? Is that right? I almost said Floridian, or I guess it would a bit of a slip there. Thank you, JV. Let's try. She received her BFA in poetry at the University of Nebraska at Omaha and her MFA at Vermont College. Her poetry collection, Dirt Eaters, was chosen for the University of Central Florida's Contemporary Poetry Series and was published by the University Press of Florida. Her second collection, Becoming Lyla Dore, is coming from Red Hen Press. I spread this out way too far. I'm losing my spot here. In spring of 2016, which we have here back at the table. Her writing has appeared in Prairie Schooner, Green Mountain Review, Indiana Review, South Dakota Review, Connecticut Review, Sugar House, and several others. She's pretty much a rock star here. She teaches at the University of Nebraska at Omaha's low-res MFA program, and she was my first mentor down there, which was pretty fantastic. Everybody said Teri, she's cool, and you know what? She was pretty awesome. Now, I was just thinking about you because of Leonard Cohen not too long ago. I was thinking about you and Dave. It was kind of late in the night playing that Hallelujah song. So I look forward to hearing what you got to say. And again, her book's back there. So put your hands together for Teri Grimm.
Very nice to see you all today on this beautiful wintry day. I'm going to read first from the book Becoming Lyla Dore, and it's a series of persona poems in the voice of a fictional silent film star. And where I'm from, in Jacksonville, Florida, has a history in silent film. When silent film first started, it started in the New York, New Jersey area, and as they became more popular and less of a novelty, they wanted to make more films. And so they needed sunshine, so they headed south. So essentially I get to play with silent film history as well as local film history. So I'm going to read some poems, a couple of things before I get started. Her birth name is Willie Sapp, and she later becomes Lyla Dore. There is a shadow figure that moves through the book called the Snake Man, and he's based on a real person in Jacksonville who made poultices and things from snake venom, and he moves throughout the book. So I'll read about 5 poems, and then I'm going to read a more Florida piece. Magic Lantern. Forget what you know about faded stars, about curiosities and relics. This is about magic. Back when there was such a thing, my father made a living as a lanternist. I'd go with him to the Imperial, where between comedy reels he'd show glass slides at the Taj Mahal, or lovers kissing in a Venetian gondola. Familiar scenes, too, and after the flickering black and gray, unexpected colors glazed the screen, and one could watch a frozen landscape deliquesce into spring. Lilacs moved by a perceptible wind. A rabbit disappear into a hole in the lake, reacquainting everyone with blue. There was a time before I was born, my father was the whole damn show, when the magic lantern made the common seem new. But he was eclipsed by the kinetoscope, the cinematograph, by a world that seemed to spin only toward new pleasures. Relegated to sing-alongs and advertisements, when my father flashed slides for trusses, the local dentist, lyrics to shine on harvest moon, well, there was no magic left then, was there? I was embarrassed that what he had to offer was no longer desired. I was at an age to understand desire, sitting in a darkened theater with strangers, watching people live on screen larger than ourselves, real but not real, and at the same time to feel someone's hand brush my own, accidentally or no, their shoulder pressed into mine as they shifted in their seat. Breath warm on my neck gave me more than a taste for intimacy. To be watched like that, to touch and be touched all at once until the body and the image of the body fused. In that cavernous stupor, even the way I dreamed was changed forever. Like the magician's assistant that disappears into a cabinet, then reappears in another part of the theater, I left my seat in the dark, mingled with the dust in the funnel of light, and created myself in my own image on the screen. Before arc light and electric bulbs, the lantern's glow came from an oxygen and hydrogen flame fixed on a cylinder of lime. Combustible, surely, but the illusion blazed brighter. To be in limelight is to become incandescent in the alchemy of dangerous gas and mineral. To smolder in another's mind or heart, I would have risked setting myself on fire if it meant the world could see me better. But that was before I knew better. When Calum Studios came to town, movies filled with the thrills of living placed a camera on the banks of Strawberry Creek, placed Union and Rebel soldiers there, placed barefoot crackers and smelted stills, Seminoles and pistol-toting lawmen, alligators and bobcats, egrets and egret hunters. Into a box they captured the light of Jacksonville's sun and consecrated with golden halos the daughters of orange growers, misers, deacons, and drunkards. These actresses leaned so prettily against the bridge's rails and fought off scoundrels' kisses. On the banks of Strawberry Creek were so many smudge pots it looked like the swamp was all ablaze. The movies brought so much mayhem to our bluff, but few of us complained, least of all me. The man who controlled the camera once stood me on a crate, held my hand in his, and helped me crank, humming a tune so the action wouldn't lose its rhythm. I peered into the glass and saw for the first time a world within the world, finer and more distinct. Horses leapt 20 feet from the bridge, draped with smoke and so many Union dead. It felt as though we may win, after all, a war long fought and decided. It was a wonder, the box so powerful, it could change our own history. I should have told you that some of the films that were made in the earliest days of silent film, there was a series called the Sunny South series, and in these films, they often depicted battles of the Civil War in which the South did really well, and kind of ignoring the overall bigger story. A visit from the Snake Man. Outside my bedroom window, beneath the sound of wind and dry leaves, a shadow called my name. Willie. Willie. No relation to any tree or shrub in the yard. He was a wanderer, friend of the moon. He entered my room and said my name once more, slow and on one note, so it sounded like the foghorns of ships that pass in the river. Familiar. How do you do, I asked, and asked once more when he didn't respond. Your name doesn't suit you. One day you'll be called something else. He moved about like a nosy guest, pausing at my dresser, peering inside my armoire, lingering by the window. Sometimes you look like a man carrying a satchel, and then like a snake slithering up my wall. And the moon lights you up like a ghost. I can nearly see right through you. I looked down at my nightgown, my bare arms. I was glowing like a corpse candle, translucent blue. I'm luminous, I said, and knew it. His shadow covered me like a blanket as if to put me out. Just like the moon, Willie, you have a dark side, too. And he stayed there above me, shifting from man to snake and back again before disappearing in a cloud. But I knew he would return, sure as shine. There's a family that moves throughout this book, the Moores, and at one point, Lyla goes to work for the Moores when the mother has to go away. And there's a son who she's close to, Henry, there's a daughter, Dulcie, and there's twins. I recall that summer. This begins the story that only plays inside my head. To tell it makes me anxious. Words disintegrate in air. Then what? This memory turns to dust, floats away on my breath. If only. I'll give you the scenarios straight, and where you'll see patterns neatly determined as a tile floor, I'll see a mosaic of colored glass that cuts and stones fit for a penitent's shoes. Private hurts satisfy, and it did please me to take care of my neighbor's family. Mrs. Moore had a sick mother in Perry. I'd just turned 16, so I could do the laundry and cook the meals, send the children out to play, make uncomfortable small talk with Dr. Moore about his day before I went home. I liked washing dishes by that window. The patch of dandelions at the edge of the woods looked like a green sky full of small suns. I liked sitting on the porch sewing a button, snapping peas. But as weeks passed, I grew bored and thus bolder, with Dulcie and the twins gone for hours and Henry who knows where, as though it embarrassed them to see me play the handmaiden. I'd sit at her vanity, a smear of lipstick, try on her jewelry and her dresses. I ironed his shirts and placed a jar of flowers on his dresser, dripped lavender water onto his pillow, left a strand of my hair. You see the pattern, don't you? That thing I do, that gesture to get someone's attention. It was inevitable he'd show up one afternoon, find me wearing silk from her bottom drawer. He locked the door and leaned against the wall, hands behind him. I'll only go so far with this. He told me to do things to myself, and without hesitation I did them. And I could see myself in the mirror as I did them. And I could see him against the wall watching me, and I could see me watching him, watching me, watching him, watching me. I was dizzy, an overwound toy, until I curled my finger at him, and he and he and he and I came loose, fixed and broken at the same time. I felt clean inside. Later, I burned the sheet in a barrel out back. It went up in an instant, as if it were made to start fires, and I wondered how long it would take for me to be consumed like that. A question for the devil, I guessed. Through the smoke, I saw smaller puffs of smoke, as though a small train were headed west through the field, but it was only the dandelions. In a matter of hours, they had turned. I picked a handful, made complicated wishes, and blew. As they fell apart in the breeze, I told the wind to carry them that way. And I knew summer would go on that way. The bare stems I put in a jar on his dresser. Days later, when I cut my hand open slicing onions, I decided housework and children were a distraction. His desire and my reflection became the only things that mattered. What was real and what was illusion collided in the mirror like an accident, but a compelling one. Before it's determined who's responsible, before the victims are named. More happens before she makes her way west. But anyway, just a little taste of that. And then I'm just going to end with a little Florida piece. Sometimes I call this, I don't know, more essay. Sometimes it's a poem, depending how I make it look on the page. But anyway, in Florida, I hunt alligators. So this is a poem that compresses about 3 hunts into one piece. How to acquire an alligator purse. It It begins with the chicken rotting inside a cooler, left sitting in the sun for days. Breathe through your mouth. Look out over the water. Observe how cypress knees make small cities at the shoreline. Listen for sounds of whooping cranes, of owls, anything to ignore the bile brimming your throat, and string the bait peg deeply through flesh. Make sure it will not fall out. Attach the bait to a milk jug and wait in a small John boat on a dusk-quiet lake in Tallahassee. Have a second vodka tonic and question whether alcohol mixed with alligator hunting is anyone's idea of sensible. Ignore the horde of gnats already drowning inside, many taking refuge on the lime as if it were a raft, and drink anyway, noting how context makes too many things palatable for you. Inside the boat, there are two others along with a cooler, backpacks, and gear. It's hard to imagine room for an alligator as well, but it will fit. And later the blood on your clothes will feel necessary, smell strangely sweet. You will get wet, sticky, and at some point a bucket will be used as a toilet, the awkwardness drowned out by your kind companion singing Heartbreaker while you go. The glow from Scott's bobbing headlamp illuminating dozens of red eyes just off the bow. But that is later. Now the jug begins to move. Bart steers towards it, Scott ready to drive the harpoon line into the alligator's back. When another harpoon is needed because of the reptile's size and mood, it turns out you do have the means of strength to pierce the scuted armor, and the alligator sinks to the bottom of the lake. Slowly, hand over hand, bring him back to the surface, being reminded by Scott to let go of the line of common sense suggests you should. And that sentence hangs over the rocking boat as the alligator, one leg over the side, tries to climb in, its teeth biting through the gunnel. Scott kicks its snout, forces him off. Your grip loosened long ago. The alligator calms down, sinks again. And again you bring him up until just under the surface he floats right next to the boat. Scott readies the bang stick, hands it over, and Bart reminds you how important it is that the blast occur just under the water. And because uncertain are your eyes, Scott's hands grip yours, and together you find the spot just behind the skull. Bring the stick down with force, and a small explosion bubbles through the water, through the alligator, up into your hands, and you can feel it, the exact moment life is taken from the body. Help pull it into the boat, and already the telling of the story begins to each other and in preparation for future dinner parties and neighborhood barbecues, where you'll take pleasure in the look you get from people that says, "You hunt alligators?" But now there are tasks left to do that involve duct tape, a knife, a screwdriver, paperwork, and a tag. The 12-foot alligator is onerous, and you will hold your part of its big dead body against your chest as you struggle to move it from boat to ground to truck to the processor who will do the work required to give you meat, the smooth underside, until one afternoon there you are in your own driveway, skin laid out in front of you, a relic with bits of pink flesh remaining. You salt it liberally and roll it up like a scroll and place it in a large plastic bag, ship it to a tanner in Georgia. When it comes back to you, many months will have passed. The beast's belly now a rich brown leather you can't stop touching. At your next appointment, sitting in your hairstylist's chair, you tell her the story of the alligator, and it will just so happen her Pilates teacher's sister is a purse designer in New York, who may be intrigued with the idea of working with your skin. Then and only then will you get your purse. All told, it will take more than a year. All told, it will be the costliest object you've ever owned. One of a kind even. The color of tobacco with silver detailing and large enough that things will be lost inside of it. This beautifully made artifact, but cumbersome, heavy. So heavy you'll find it difficult to carry for any length of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. That was wonderful. I got rushed up here in the beginning. I forgot to mention you wrestle alligators. I thought that's a very important thing. Yeah. Liz, how about you? What's your superpower then? That'd be knife throwing. Mine is drinking martinis. But Tom, I don't know about you yet. We're gonna have Liz come up here. Let's see. Liz Kay is the founding editor of Sparkville Press and the journal Burnt District. Both these are in Omaha. It's fantastic stuff. She of both the Academic American Poet Prize and the Wendy Ford Foundation Prize for exemplary work in poetry. Poems have appeared in several journals. I got Rhino, Nimrod, it's a wonderful magazine, Will, Iron Horse Literary Review, Sugar House Review. Putnam Sons in June of 2016. She lives in Omaha, Nebraska with her husband and her 3 sons. Please help me welcome Liz Kay.
My novel, Monsters, Stacy is a poet. She lives in Omaha. That because I was cheating and I'm lazy. So she's a poet. She lives in Omaha, and she's also recently widowed. Her husband about 8 months prior to the start of the novel. Stacy's just sort of drifting. She's a mother connecting with her kids. She's a poet, but she hasn't been writing. So she's just sort of going through the motions in her life. That someone in Hollywood is interested in her novel in verse. And seriously, but she goes along with it thinking that, you know, it's a break from movie adaptation that she is a very famous actor, very, very A-list, gorgeous, and Stacy is and at this point in the novel, Tommy and Stacy so they've reached the point in their they are sort of in an argument at this point. They are pretending like they're arguing about Tommy's Sadie, but really they're arguing about the fact that they started dating a doctor named Philip. Absolutely, I say when he calls. I'd love to. He picks me up around 5. I've toned the hair down. I've got less shadow. My arms look really good and my legs are already bare, so what the hell? I've got a warm coat. You look beautiful, he says as I slide into the very doctorly, very sturdy, 4 doors, leather interior. Him close enough to touch, but it's not a stick shift. And of course, it's a steakhouse, but it doesn't really matter as long as a mixer, and I'm there with all these Midwestern doctors' wives, and I think, not a fit. This is not a fucking fit. Time. I know how to blend in. Philip Philip has a little stubble coming in, a little 5 o'clock shadow, and I like the way it looks on him.
I shift my body so our arms are just barely touching. I should introduce you to a few people. This time he does room. He's getting better. I can't keep their names, but she's an OB and he's an infectious disease. Mark. I don't know what he does, but he is also not a doctor. And what do you do? Asks. I say, draining the last of my vodka. I fill the glass like the ice might be hiding more. You don't say, says the guy, and then he laughs and says, you must get good alimony then. Alimony because my husband fucking died, just to be an asshole. But Philip says she does a little screenwriting too. She has a movie coming. Is it Stacy? And I just sort of shrug. They're still filming, I say, and I jiggle my glass again and wonder if he's going to notice. I was just in LA a few weeks ago on set, and he says on set like he's making air quotes, but he doesn't actually. He keeps his hands down and his left hand is still on my back, which right now is the only thing that's going right. Really, says Kara, but she says it like it absolutely does not. Philip notices my glass and says, can I get you another? And I flash him my very best. So what's the movie called? Mark asks. The book was called Monsters in the Afterlife. Suddenly, Janet is interested. She says, hey, I think I've heard of that with Tommy DeMarco and Sarah Nixon, I say. Holy crap, that's a big deal, she says. I just shake my head to pay me, so that part of it was pretty nice. He returns with my drink and presses it into my hands. He rests his own hand back on the small of my back, and I think, good boy. And I turn and smile at him. Thank you, I say. And I take it. Glad when you called. But then Janet asks, so have you met Tommy DeMarco? We've been in some meetings, I say. I don't add how he doesn't appear to be speaking to me since I called him a narcissist. I know he's taken my advice, though, because I've heard from Sadie and Matt's already been over for dinner. Philip says, I didn't realize he was involved. I say, and I nod, and Jason Collier. Wow, you really undersold this, he says. He turns toward a little movie thing, I guess. He shakes his head. Jason Collier. Says, Collier's a great director, but I've never thought that much of DeMarco. He does some weird stuff. Didn't he do that movie where he's a drug addict who thinks he's killed a friend, but then it turns out that really he didn't? I say, yeah, that's Tommy. But he seems like a real playboy, says Red Tie Guy. And I laugh, because who says really, in this really engaged tone, and looking at me a little more intently, and I feel like I've just turned into a tabloid. I mean, he has a pretty bad reputation, I say, and then I shut my mouth and focus on the vodka. Philip pulls into my driveway and stops the car. If the kids weren't home, I'd ask you in. That's okay, he says. He turns to face me. Can I kiss you goodnight? I'd be mad if you didn't. He leans toward me, holds my neck in his left hand, and he parts his lips this time. I am marginally impressed. I put my hand on the top of his thigh and press my thumb across it and feel him shift in his seat. His mouth moves with a little more assurance, a little more need. I twist my chin to the left to free up my lips, and I trace the stubble along his jaw with the tips of my fingers. I like this on you, I say, a little rough against. I like you. And he turns his mouth to find again, and this time he uses his tongue to tease open my lips. And I think, of course you do. I think, who wouldn't? Crunchy or creamy, I say, holding the pantry door open. Creamy, Stevie says. Ben's having scrambled eggs for breakfast, but Stevie wants peanut butter toast. I set the jar on the counter in front of him. I turn to look at him, but he's focused on spreading butter. You mean because I went to dinner last night? And 2 other times, too. You're right, we did go 2 other times, so I guess I have a friend I sometimes go to dinner with. Is that why you're not talking to Tommy anymore? I turn back to the stove. Ben's eggs look a little dry. I slide them onto a plate. I'm so stupid. Of course they would have noticed. We talk all the time, and sometimes my hands will be full and my phone will start ringing, and one of them will pick it up for me. Stevie always hands it right over, but Ben will talk for a minute or 2. I'm not talking to Tommy, I say. He's just been really busy with the movie. It doesn't have anything to do with me having dinner. I set the plate of eggs in Ben's place. Can you go tell your brother his breakfast is ready? Says, and he hops off the stool and heads down the hall. I turn toward the sink, run cold water into the pan. Mom, Stevie says, so I know he's back. I really like Tommy. I shut the water off, but I don't turn around. I say, I really like him too. I don't hear from Tommy for 3 weeks, and when I do, I wake up to see a text from him that reads, I forgive you. I pick up the phone and type, go fuck yourself, and then hit send. I'm in line at the post office when he calls. Books. I see his number come up and I hit answer and hold the phone to my ear. He must realize I've picked up because I asked Stacy. I scuff my foot along the floor. Okay, he says, you were right. How's Sadie? I say, but I make sure my tone stays pouty. I don't want him to think I'm not still pissed. Better, maybe, I don't know. He sighs. You were right. I'm a terrible father. I didn't say you were a terrible father. I said you were a narcissist. Same thing. I'm almost to the front of the line. I say I should go. It's not a good time. Come on, Stacy, what are you doing? He said. Shift its weight to keep from dropping it. You know, sometimes people argue, and then if they aren't complete assholes, they figure out a way to patch shit up. So, stop being a complete asshole. I set my package on the counter and try to smile at the woman behind it. I'm trying not to let anything slip. I shift the phone a little away from my mouth and I say, I need to send this to Minneapolis, media rate. On the other end of the line, Tommy says, oh, fuck you, and hangs up. When I walk out to the car, I don't get in. I lean against the trunk and let the sun warm my face. We're having one of those early springs when it's already warming up in March. I have always loved spring in Nebraska. When Michael wanted me to move here, he brought me out in the spring, and the whole city was so green, and the trees were budding, and Michael and I were starting a new life. And I said, yes, let's do it here, and so we did. And even here in the post office parking lot, it feels like the air is filled with possibility. It feels like the very beginning. I take my phone out, and I call Tommy, and when he answers, I say, I'm lousy, I got apologies. And he says, you suck at forgiveness too. I know, I say, but you're good at it, right? I am, he says. I'm like fucking magnanimous. Philip is taking me to dinner for the 4th time on Friday, and once again, Jenny's offered to take the kids. He seems more relaxed this time. He's actually wearing jeans, and he wants to hit this Mexican place in the old market. He tries to tequila straight. He gives me a look, but the thought of all that sugar makes me feel nauseated. I sip my tequila and rub my leg against his. When he hands the check to the server, I lean close to his ear. I let my breast press against his arm, and I'm sure he notices. I whisper, when are you going to show me your place? He lives in a condo in an old converted warehouse. It's small, but very, very nice. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, top of the line, everything. It looks like it came furnished because I can't imagine him picking out any of this. It's lots of glass and chrome and leather. We stand in the kitchen and he pours me a glass of wine. I remember the 2 tequilas at the restaurant and promise myself that this will be my only glass. I don't want to regret it in the morning. He says, we can go up to the roof deck. I say, I like it here. And I set my wine on the counter behind him and turn toward him and tip my head and kiss him on the chin. He puts his arms around me. It's more hug than passionate embrace. He keeps his hands very still. Are you going to give me a tour? I say. And he says, yes. Oh, yeah, sure. He takes my left hand and I grab the wine with my right because I feel like I'm going to need it. I feel like this is going to be a long night. And of course, he shows me the whole goddamn place, a little balcony, and off the hallway there's a bathroom with a very expensive sink. I say, is this a one bed or two? And he says, because I'm realizing he's really down this hall. Where's your bedroom, I say, and I use my huskiest voice, which frankly I don't do very well or often, but I'm running out of ideas. Just up these stairs. I realize he looks a little nervous, and I know this isn't the first time since his divorce. I know he dated a woman for almost 6 months last year. It must be me. It must be the widow thing. I walk in front of him and take his hand and pull it close behind me, and we reach the top. It's an open loft with a double bed, and beyond I walk over to look, and when I turn around, he's next to me. I take his hand and place it on my waist. He kisses me again, and I unbutton the top button of his shirt, and then the next, kissing the skin underneath. I drop his shirt on the floor. He says, "Are you sure about this?" But I don't answer. I reach for his belt and unfasten it, unbutton his jeans. I let my fingers slip inside, trace the line of his pelvis. I push him backwards toward it's down. I lift my shirt up over my arms and move his hands to the zipper of my jeans, let him strip them off. I push him flat on his back and lean him, and my hair completely covers his face. He pushes it out of the way. He says, "God, Stacy, you're beautiful," but I put my hand over his mouth. I make him kiss my fingers. He tries to roll me onto my back, but I push him down and climb on top of him. I think it's better this way. I know exactly what I'm doing.
Feeling extremely awkward today. I don't know if you guys can tell. Hopefully not. The jokes are not working. I'm going to avoid eye contact, like my students. So we got Tom Paine here left. You guys are doing good. Is it too hot in here? Do I need to open more windows? We okay? I know. Maybe it's just me. Tom Paine. Before I start this, I'm going to tell my quick short story of meeting Tom here. He was at the MFA, UNO. We were at Weed Lodge. I don't know if you remember this. I don't know. But I think I was coming up from the basement or something, and this guy approaches me. And I think maybe I'm just remembering this how I want to remember it, but I think he liked one of my poems. And I looked at the guy, and I'm like, I didn't know who the hell he was. And I'm like, I thought he was like here to go golfing or something. Like I wasn't even, because I hadn't even really saw him yet. I'm like, yeah, all right, thanks, guy, whatever, you know. I'm walking down the hall, and Dave Minnelli's like, dude, and he's like, that was Tom Paine. Do you not know who Tom Paine is? And I'm like, no, tell me, you know, whatever. And then I'm like, I remember, maybe it was the day after, it's blurry, but martinis. And so I remember going down the hallway trying to catch you before you left, but then I think you left, and I missed you, but I got to know you. And his lectures and readings were fantastic. I remember going to them and just energetic. I was just like, God, you know, we have somebody with some energy, Tom. They were great. I stole the discs from Dave Minnelli and kept them, lost them, but then found them again. I think the first lecture, again, maybe this is the way I'm remembering it, was something about the love of writing. I swear to God that's what it was, but or maybe that's just what I was hearing. It was early. I don't remember. All right, I'm just going to swear to God I'm going to read this thing here. I think this is live on Facebook, too. Tom Paine's poetry is upcoming in the Nation, Fence, Green Mountain Review, Epiphany, and elsewhere. A boy's book of nervous breakdowns, which is his most recent stuff, and I don't know if we have any books back there, but I know some people brought theirs. Wonderful. It's an awesome book. A new collection of short stories was published in October by LSU. His stories have been published in the New Yorker, Harper's, the Boston Review, New England Review, the award anthologies, the O. Henry Awards, and the Pushcart Prize. His first collection, Scar Vegas, which is another great book, was a New York Times Notable Book of the Year and a Penn Hemingway finalist. He's an associate professor in the MFA program at the University of New Hampshire. Tom, glad you're here. Glad you made it. Let's put your hands together for Tom Paine.
Wow, that was a great intro. I do remember that, and he looked at me like, who the fuck is this guy saying that I liked this poem, but I did love his poetry. Anyway, my name's Tom, and I teach at the University of New Hampshire and at UNO's MFA program. And when you get out of here, if any of you want to leave Nebraska and get an MFA, a Master's in Fine Arts, write to me at the University of New Hampshire and remind me that you were here, or come to UNO's MFA. You know, I don't really like to do readings. As grateful as I am to be here, I like to do talkings, if you will. So I might not read that much, if it's okay with my boss. Because one of the reasons I became a writer is I think I grew up in an Irish Catholic family in Rhode Island. There's about 20 Rhode Islands in the distance between here and Nebraska City. It's a very tiny state. And when I told my dad, well, my dad found out after college, when I was a little older than some of you, that I wanted to be a writer. He drove me to the end of a dirt road, and he wouldn't look me in the eye, and he said, Tommy, this is what we talk in Rhode Island. He said, Tommy, yeah, your mother says you want to be a writer. And I said, yeah, Dad, you know, thanks for noticing. Been talking about this for a year, living over the garage. And he says, yeah, well, you want to be a writer? And then he had to think about it. He says, you know what you are? You're sensitive. My dad's a World War II guy, and I was like, what do you mean, Dad? He says, yeah, you're sensitive. You're sensitive. You've always been sensitive. You got a quirk. I was like, well, what do you mean, Dad? You got a quirk. You know, you're like your Uncle Charlie. Uncle Charlie, yeah, you're like Uncle Charlie, that's it. And this was the kiss of death because Uncle Charlie was a singer. He's the only one who was artistic in the whole family or musical. But I knew what he was saying because Uncle Charlie ended up an alcoholic who ended up dead on the floor of his bedroom banging his wedding ring on a pipe to attract attention below. So that's how Uncle Charlie ended up. And he was sensitive. So to be sensitive, my dad was saying, was to die a dead alcoholic of old age, miserable and lonely. But then I looked at my dad and I said, well, where are we going from here, Dad? We're at the end of a dirt road. I'm 22 and I want to be a writer. And he says, yeah, well, in my generation, a lot of good men, like you, who were sensitive, you know what they did? And I was like, no, what'd they do, Dad? He said, if you thought of becoming a priest. Now, that was loaded too, like Uncle Charlie, because what Dad was really saying, I don't know if you understand, sensitive. And then it hit me. I knew what he was saying. He said, my son's gay because he's sensitive. So if you're gay and sensitive, go become a Catholic priest. Nobody will notice. You do what you do. You got the black gowns on. Nobody can see what gets you excited. You know. Just shut the fuck up and go be a priest. So I said, Dad, you know I'm not gay. Did you notice the woman living with us all summer up in the house? That's my girlfriend. He's like, yeah, I know, but you know, you can still be gay. So I said, Dad, no, I'm not gay. It'd be okay. To me, it would be fine if I was. Whatever. But I wasn't. I was sensitive. And my dad gave me $500 and said I had to go. And I was like, go where? He said that, you know, that's up for you to decide. It was nice of him to give me $500 though. He said, you know, go get your life going. But I did want to be a writer. In my family, becoming a writer was not something you did. And I realized that although my father wanted me to be a priest, that I have, which brings me to my point, I have become a priest in a sense because I'm a writer and I'm a teacher and I used to be a journalist And like a good priest or a good minister might, I want to change lives. And if I'm not doing that with my life's work, then I don't want to do it. And it was very hard for me to realize, because I grew up in a very money-oriented family, that you work to make money, you work to make money. I said to my dad once, he called up long after I was older, and he was mad at me because I was living the life of a poor writer. And he said, you know, how can you be happy, Tommy? How can you be happy? You got nothing. You don't even have health insurance. Which was a big thing to my dad. And I said, well, I am happy, Dad. I'm 40 and I'm happy and I'm writing. And I said, I am happy. And then he hung up on me. And my little sister called me up later that night and she said, Jesus Christ, Tommy, what'd you say to Dad? I've never heard him so angry. And I had to think. I was like, I don't know, sis. The last thing I remember was telling him that I was happy. She said, that's it. Why the hell did you do that? You fool. You told your dad you're happy, but you're not. What he thinks should be making somebody happy. You're not a hard-working citizen. Dad believed that he was miserable his whole life, but he did what he was supposed to do. And that was my dad, and that was his decision. But I chose to be a writer because I wanted to, well, I got out of college. I was in college like you, and I loved staying up late talking about my classes, among other things. I like drinking beer, too. But I liked learning. And then when I graduated, I remember everybody graduating and leaving campus, and I was standing in the driveway of the school as everyone drove off, and I thought life was going to continue in the way it had in college. I didn't get the memo that you're supposed to get a job and get to work. Because what I loved about college was learning. And I didn't know that after college you were supposed to do a job, and that job you might not have the opportunity to continue to learn every day. And that's when it dawned on me that I did have a quirk, and one of my quirks was I'm insanely curious. I do love learning things, and that was weird among my peers, that I like to learn stuff. And I also like people to be better tomorrow than they are today. And what I discovered was that becoming a writer allowed me to be curious every day of my life, because my bread and butter is discovering something about you, perhaps, as a journalist. And I was a journalist to make money, because when I got out, I tried to write a novel about a talking dodo bird. And surprisingly, no one wanted it. I went to editors and agents, and I called up one famous agent, and I said, did you get my book? Because somebody had turned me on to this famous agent. And famous agent from New York City said, I couldn't read it. And I was like, no, take your time. Take your time. And she said again, I couldn't read it. And I still thought she meant she didn't have time to read my dodo book. It was called Dodo for Dinner. It's about the last dodo bird. They're extinct. What she meant was she couldn't read it because she felt it was so bad. So when I got out, I was like, I'm going to be a novelist after my dad kicked me out, and I didn't make any money, so I ended up working in a psych hospital for a while just to make money, and I kept writing because I was too stupid not to. And then I was like, oh shit, maybe there's another way to be curious your whole life, and also see your words on the page. So that's when I fell into this thing called journalism. And I love journalism because I didn't go to college for journalism, but it's not that hard to teach yourself and just go to a local newspaper and try to work for free for a couple of articles. You can figure it out. But what I loved about journalism was every day I got up and the editor would tell me to go talk to somebody. And I was like, shit, if there's one thing an Irish American can do, it's talk to people. But then I got to learn stuff, and I got to ask them all the questions I was curious about. And what I discovered was being a curious person is your bread and butter as a journalist. And every day is new, and there's nothing to stop anyone in this room from becoming a journalist. And damn it, right now, we need journalists more than ever. And journalists come in all varieties. There's hard news journalists, where you go and find out why the person robbed the bank, and you call them up and you say, why'd you steal the money? But my specialty is what they call soft news. Like a new rock and roll band was coming to town, and I get to go interview them. There's a place for everybody in journalism, but it allows you to keep asking why. And as some of you might be saying, as my students at UNH, my undergraduates say to me, but Tom, I don't know anything about journalism. I'm like, that's why you're in college. Because all you got to do is walk over. If you have a newspaper here, you just walk over and start writing stuff. Or when you get out, you start writing stuff, and no one can stop you. So journalism was a great way for me to continue to ask why. And then as I was a journalist, I found out, I tried writing fiction, it didn't work, and then I became a journalist to make money. And then I found that if you're in a bar and you start asking questions of somebody, the kind of questions I like to ask, just because I want you to tell me a story and I'll ask you questions, the great way to ask questions is just repeat what the last sentence the person said. Just whatever somebody says, you go, did you really walk out the door? And then they go on and they tell you more, and then they tell you about, and then the ATM. Was it really the ATM? And people will just tell you the most amazing things. But what I found is, I've been in bars and I'll talk to people or on trains and airports because I'm curious. I want to know about everybody. If I had time, I'd want to learn all about you and ask all sorts of impertinent, curious questions about where you're from, what you like, what you do. But I found, particularly as a man, I can only speak as a man, sometimes people find it really weird when you ask a lot of questions. It's my dad's thing. You're quirky. You're weird. Why are you asking questions? Just don't ask questions. It's the vibe. So usually I found if you say, well, I'm a journalist, then they're like, okay. It allows you to be quirky and ask a lot of questions that are impertinent about people. Just say, I'm a journalist, even if you're not. If you're ever in a bar and get caught asking too many questions, just say, I'm a journalist otherwise. Not working right now, but I'm a journalist. So what I found was I returned to fiction, which is, as was said, my book is a boy's book of nervous breakdowns. I returned to fiction because, well, I'm a born liar. And I got in a little trouble because in journalism, because they do tend to like the truth. And I found the truth occasionally kind of boring, especially work for small town newspapers I've worked for. I found the truth kind of boring. So I had a little trouble sticking with the facts when somebody was telling me a good story. Like once I wrote a story about a woman did a home birth in a whirlpool, in a jacuzzi, and I couldn't resist. She did do it, and her husband filmed it, and I wrote about it, but I put at the bottom that it was available at the local video store for $19.95. And people believed it and went there, and then the husband came to me and said, what the hell are you doing? Anyway, so as I talked to people or read things that I found curious, I continued my discovery in college and after college that I was a person unlike other people who like to ask why or find out things, and that was okay. And I had to break through the barrier that my father had set, which seems to be a common American barrier, that it's not okay if you're a little kid. Like when I was a little kid, I was always asking my parents questions. If you are deep down inside yourself that person who always asked your parents questions, why? Why? I did that all the time. And my father, I remember once he leaned over to the back seat and said, shut the hell up, Tommy, God damn it. And I stopped talking for 3 months. Because he was a pretty tough dad. I stopped talking, and it made me realize as I got older, there is an American thing where you don't ask questions. You don't ask your parents questions, but if you were born natively a person who loved to ask questions and find out about other people, if that's your native nature and you suppress that, it makes you sad. Because you're hiding who you are, your curiosity, your vitality. And it's suppressed. And in America, we ask you to suppress that. Well, that's why I became a journalist and a writer and a poet. Because then I could express my native curiosity, and it was okay. And it took a lot for me to break through that wall my dad had said of don't ask questions, and to start to talk again, and start to ask, why is the world the way it is? And whenever I find something particularly intriguing about someone, I might follow up with them. Like in my first collection, I met a skateboarding punk who nobody liked. He was in the street, and he had just come back from the anarchist convention. And everybody else was like, they just saw a dirty street kid with living on the street with a skateboard. And I was like, cool, the anarchist convention. So I knew to be a journalist just means you take your notepad and sit down. So I sat down next to the guy, and I took down everything he said and asked him all the questions I always wondered about anarchist, skateboarder, punks. And we had a great time talking about it. And I wrote it down and went back to him. And nobody wanted it as a journalism story because the editor said, who the hell cares about this street kid? And I don't see your angle on it, Tom. So I said, well, I'll write it as fiction then. So I took what he said about his experience going to Portland, Oregon for the anarchist convention, and how one of the troubles of being an anarchist is they had a little trouble organizing things. Being an anarchist means you don't organize shit, so things went from bad to worse, but he fell in love with his girlfriend Blue out there, and they hit the road together hitchhiking. And I was like, that is a cool story. Life is full of cool stories. So I wrote it all down, wrote it up, took about 30 pages, sent it out to get published, because you got to be kind of ballsy or gutsy to be a writer. You got to say, I'm never going to stop sending. Screw them. One of the writers who helped me the most was from Oxford, Mississippi. His name was Larry Brown. He passed away a few years ago. But he was just a Marine veteran, house painter. No one said Larry Brown could be a writer. He just didn't stop. He has a story like 96 days about he'd paint just enough to go home and write. Because he had to write, because he had to express who he was. If you're writing from a personal expression of who the hell you are, the questions that you have as an individual, the family, each one of you grew up in a family. If I was an anthropologist, I could ask you questions about your family, and each one of those families would be different than the person next to you. That's the kind of shit that's cool to write about. If you don't believe that, then you're not really believing in yourself, which is what my father told me to do. Don't believe in myself as an individual worthy of writing about. You know, I'm sure if you're in Chad's class or Zach's class, he talks about finding your voice. What finding your voice really means is believing that your eyeballs, looking at your life and your experiences, are valid and worthy, whether you served in Afghanistan or whether you served on a farm. Your particular experiences of your mom and dad, your brothers, your sisters, your animals, your failures in love, your joys in love, all of that is cool to write about. And damn it, you should. Because it has value. And the minute you put it on paper, you might say, I can't write anymore, I don't like it. You're actually wrestling with your love of self when you don't write. If you say, I don't want to write each day, I don't want to write a diary, I want to write, and you find it hard to do, and we all do, all three of us writers will testify how hard it is to go to the desk and write, and part of the hardness is because you don't think what you're writing is valuable, even if it doesn't get published. To jump that hurdle and believe that what you're writing is valuable, no matter what, is one of the greatest experiences you can have. That poem that never gets published, but you wrote it, is really important. To yourself, to your inner joy. And as I slowly, and it took years, built up my self-confidence that what I was doing mattered, I became a happier person, actually. I did, in some inscrutable way. You know, I flipped off my family and said, screw you with your thing about asking questions or finding joy in poetry or writing. Screw you for not believing that that mattered. Fuck you. I said that to my siblings. They didn't like that. But I did, and they were like astonished. And I was like, no, not one of you read my book. When my first book of stories came out, no one in my family read it. I was astonished. I was like, your brother wrote a book. Nothing, nada. Because they were still mad at me for choosing to be a writer. Choosing to be a writer was bad. I was like, really? To be a writer's bad? They wanted me to become a lawyer or something, whatever, it didn't matter. I could work for Exxon, just as long as I made money, tried to have a big house, that was our life goal. Anyway, what I found was that the reason I moved to fiction after being a journalist was because I could tell stories like that anarchist kid and try to find truth. You see, in journalism, in life, what's really invigorating is truth. If you come from a family that has a lot of lies and hidden secrets, like mine, that's debilitating. That actually affects your psychic happiness. The truth will set you free, and I found, although sometimes it's troubling, I found in journalism, that was one of the things I was always looking for. What's the truth here? You know, why did people vote for Trump? I'm not antagonistic so much as confused. Why would people vote for Hillary? I wanted to know that too. I just want to know. I want to understand the individual human being. So I turned to fiction because I wanted to find a different kind of truth. Because in fiction, I can say a lot more than can get in a magazine or a news piece. So I can interview a man who did several tours in Afghanistan. And I can keep asking him questions till I understand as a human being a little bit of what his experience is having served 3 tours in Afghanistan. And if I can then take that with his permission and turn it into an experience on the page of what it was to serve 3 tours in Afghanistan and see soldiers who had PTSD come back and suffer for that in a hidden way. Fiction can shine lights on the light on lives that are otherwise hidden in America. I can't get as many stories as one might like about PTSD in a newspaper, but I can write a novel about anything, and I can build off real life about talking to real people, and then you can read those novels and go, I have sympathy, which in the end is what fiction is supposed to do, I think. It's supposed to allow you into other people's lives so you walk in their shoes. I hate to sound too Christian here, but you're walking in another's shoes, and hopefully doing so with compassion so that you're changed. You're changed as a human being. Some of you might not have spent a lot of time outside of Nebraska. Until recently, I'd never been in Nebraska, but I'm changed by being here. You might be changed, hopefully, after college by, if you can, travel. I don't care how you do it, travel. You might be changed by that. You're constantly changing. Why I love being a writer, and I'll stop in a second, is it allows me a life of change. And I happen to be born with a soul that needs to change or it gets unhappy. It needs to learn. I have a hunger for that. My favorite story, I won't read from it after all this, but I wrote a story called Hotel Palestine. And just to give you an example of how I write stories, and you all could find stories from your own life, I'm sure, and just write them down as the truth and then add to them as you see fit. But tell your story. I was at a college reunion and a woman came up to me really drunk. I didn't recognize her. It was 20 years later or more. And she came out of a crowd and she's like, Tom. I was like, yes. Because she was swaying. She said, you're the one I want to tell my story to. And I said, I didn't want to tell her I didn't recognize her because she seemed to know me. So we sat down. I said, tell me your story. Because she had read my first book. And her story was that she had served as a reporter in Iraq just after Saddam Hussein fell, the first Iraq war, second. But she was one of the first women over the border as a reporter. And she was interesting because no one told her she could really be a reporter either. In particular, they didn't want her to go into Iraq, but she did it herself. She flew to Amman, Jordan. She got herself across the border. I mean, that took guts. Anyway, when she got there, all the male reporters were like, what are you doing here? And she needed a translator, and she couldn't find a translator. She was at the top of the Hotel Palestine, the name of the story. And she was telling me this. She was like, Tom, I was at the top of the hotel. I risked everything to get involved in real war reporting. And none of the men in Iraq would be my translator, so I was screwed. And she said, suddenly I saw this woman coming up to the top of the Hotel Palestine holding a newborn baby. And the Iraqi woman's story was that this was her newborn baby, that we had done this thing of throwing bombs at Iraq called shock and awe. And during that period, this woman's husband had gone insane. He was a pharmacist. He had to be tied to the bed. So here's an Iraqi woman with a baby, and it turned out she spoke perfect English. So my friend Lisa and this woman, she said, will you be my translator? So my story, is her story, the Hotel Palestine, is about they're traveling together. Lisa, the Iraqi woman, and the newborn baby, traveling around Iraq, reporting on what was happening. You hear a story like that, maybe a story in your family story, I'm sure it's very interesting. And I would ask about your family and try to find a story if I was going to write a story based on your family. But this story immediately intoxicated me because Lisa she was in bad shape when I saw her. And part of it was that this woman, at the end of the story, has a very hard time. The baby dies because of all the hospitals didn't have anything. And the baby died, and she helped bury the baby. I mean, it's just a tragic story, but I was like, I have to write this. And so I spent many hours on the phone with Lisa, and I wrote it all down, and I kept rebuilding it, trying to tell the truth of this thing. And when I finished it, I didn't know it was going to get published, but I was so happy because I had taken this experience that I had learned about by asking why and turned it into a story that meant something to me, that I had captured something. It's like, if you can capture life before it goes away, I think you're doing something valuable. So I hope that's okay that I did, rather than a reading, a talking, because I wanted to leave you with something. Because as I said, as opposed to my dad, I'm not a priest, but I like people, I like the idea that I can encourage you. Maybe nobody here has met a writer from Rhode Island who's a former journalist, nor an alligator hunter, nor a beautiful novelist. Maybe you haven't, so maybe us standing here will change you a little. You're like, I could do that. I'll leave you with one last thing. When I wanted to be a writer, there's a writer named Kurt Vonnegut, who was big in my generation. And as I said, I grew up with this sort of harsh dad who didn't believe in poetry, he didn't believe in music, he didn't believe in art, he didn't believe in sensitive. That was my family, nothing sensitive, just verboten. And when I was about 17 or 18, I read this author, Kurt Vonnegut. This man, this book, turned me on to the idea that it was okay to be sensitive. that it was okay to be what's called humanist, to worry about other people, to worry about bombing other countries. If you have someone new in your life, like I had Kurt Vonnegut in my life suddenly, it changed me. He was my father suddenly. I wrote him a letter and said, "You are my father," when I was 21. You are my father, Kurt Vonnegut, because, and it sounds a little crackpot, and I knew it was sort of, I was saying it kind of tongue-in-cheek, but also meant it sincerely, because growing up with the dad I was, this man exposed me to a different way of being in the world, being, well, what we call back in New England, progressive liberal, as I am. But he taught me that I could be that. I could be cared deeply, more than anyone I'd ever met. I didn't have any access to anybody like Kurt Vonnegut in my family and extended friends, but I had Kurt Vonnegut. So a book could do that. And it certainly did. For me, it showed me a way out. So a couple things I wish for you. If you can get the money in any form at some point in your life, get a backpack on. I noticed when I taught my University of New Hampshire students, I grew up in this generation. I was young to be a hippie. I was about 10 years behind the hippie generation, but they all went all over the place. Thumbing, hitchhike, everything. And it changed their lives, because if you get out of Nebraska, if you get out of Rhode Island like I did, you will be changed. So even if you don't have much money, try to scrape together a couple $1,000 and put a backpack on. What I found, my UNH kids didn't know that you could put a backpack on. If you can scrape together from summer jobs or some money, you go to Europe and just travel. And it will change you so deeply that when you come back, you'll never be the same. The experience of travel broadens you. So that's one of the wishes I'd have for you. And the other one is the W8. The only thing you need from a college education, and I'm a professor now, and I say this at the beginning of every class, I say, if you guys learn nothing else from me, it's 3 letters, or your whole BA degree, your whole college education, and it's WHY. Asking why. The thing my father hated. He hated that I asked why. So I say to you, if you take nothing else from your college education, if you remember nothing else ever about me being here, it's invigorate your sense of asking why. Do not, if you ask one why in life right now, every given Tuesday, like Tuesday's your day to ask one why, ask a why every day, then ask 2 whys. And if you go home and your family's like, whatever happened? What's happened to you, Karen? You're asking all these questions about where I'm from when I was a little girl to your mother. Happens to me, I ask my mom all these questions. She's like, why are you asking so many questions? I'm like, because you're 83, Mom. I don't want to say, that's close to the end line, but I want to know about my mom, and she keeps leaking out these little things. And I'm like, that's my bread and butter. Tell me something. Tell me something more. So that's all I want to leave you with. If you want to be a writer, journalist, and I hope some of you consider it, or just a good human being, and some of you, if you already have kids, or you're about to have kids, or someday you'll have kids, teach them, don't be like my dad. When they ask why, say, good on you. Ask again. Ask another question. I homeschooled my daughter with my wife, and that was what I was left with out of homeschooling. If you can teach your kid to ask why when the rest of the world says don't ask why, be open to everything. Let them be open to everything. Send them to Google, send them to Wikipedia, ask them why, and question them. Make them prove why that is true. That's education, and that's also being a writer. So I hope it didn't go on too long, but I'm grateful to be here.